Welcome to My Morning Cup, a podcast produced by Costa Media Advisors and brought to you by the generous support of the Tennessee Valley Authority. To learn more about TVA's impact on our community, follow TVA on Instagram at TVA and on Twitter X at TVA News. My Morning Cup, where we have interesting conversations with genuine people. I'm Mike Costa, your host. My guests this week are Angela and Michael Ballard. Michael and Angela's goal was to travel the world to exotic places. Having visited more than 100 countries, they've successfully reached that goal and they're still visiting new places. Michael and Angela, welcome to My Morning Cup. Before I ask you to name every country you've been to in alphabetical order.
I could do it.
He could.
Well, then we're going to test you.
Oh, no.
Let me ask, what's in your morning cup?
Well,
Tea. Earl Grey, hot. I'm like Captain Picard.
yeah, and when we don't have these in the house, that's what I have. So what I'm drinking is a V8 energy drink. We call them go-go juice. So
V8 Energy. I don't think I've ever seen this. So this is the old, I could have had a V8.
Yeah, but it's also got green tea in it. So there's a little bit of
some caffeine.
A little jolt. Yeah. And, you know, if you have like 4 of them, like I do, and it's a big jolt, but yeah.
So when you're traveling, are you doing the same things in the morning? You finding your V8 energy drinks,
no.
or whatever the local?
Yeah, well, that's one of our rules of thumb: drink local, and so that also includes coffee and tea and stuff like that. Angela will probably pack 100 tea bags just in case.
I collect tea bags along the way.
Yes,
that way I never run out.
Yeah, but yeah, I'll drink espresso when I'm on the road. I told you earlier, I'm a little bit bougie with my espresso. Like it's got to be like an old, 400-year-old Vienna coffee house. That's where I'll have my espresso. But yeah, I'll do it then. But not at home, really.
And why tea, Angela?
I've never been a coffee drinker.
No?
And
you're in radio.
I know, but it's never appealed to me. And tea bags, we take a little UV sterilizing light pen with us. That way we can take our reusable water bottle and never have to buy bottled water overpriced and throw away the plastic. And so tea I can make anywhere. And we don't have to try to find a store. It can be any time, day or night. So, yeah.
Well, your story's a little bit different. And we were talking a little bit earlier, kind of the way this podcast started was to kind of trace career paths and how it's not a straight line. There's a lot of ups and downs and backs and forths. But I was very interested in what you guys are doing because you've used your careers to do what you love and you're traveling the world. And so I want to just do a little backstory first of kind of where you grew up and how you got started and kind of where that love of adventure started and then kind of get into what kind of jobs allow you to do that?
That's the trick right there, right?
That is a big trick. So Michael.
Yeah, either way. I'll answer.
Oh, that's okay. I'm going to call you Michael as long as I can remember.
Yeah.
But you grew up in Winchester on a cattle farm?
Yeah, and I mean, I say cattle farm. We had like 10 cows.
Well, that's a farm to me.
Well, but Dad did it, and if the IRS is listening, Dad did it as a tax write-off. We had all this acreage on the lake, and he bought it for that. He bought it for the lake, but he realized, well, if I have 10 cows, I can write all this off, and it's in the green belt, and I pay fewer taxes, and it's still in the green belt. But there are no cows anymore.
No more cows?
No, it's all grown up now. But yeah, cattle farm. So we would feed the cows hay in the winter and run from the bull when he was angry, and all of that.
Which was probably most of the time.
Most of the time, he was a very angry bull.
And how old were you when you moved to Saudi Arabia?
I was 12 the first time I went. Yeah. And
what took you to Saudi Arabia?
Dad was a mechanical engineer. Worked for AEDC at the base there in Tullahoma. So he was a test cell engineer, and he was actually one of the best in the world. He really was. Worked for John Deere and Boeing and all these major companies. But in Saudi Arabia, he was actually a glorified maintenance man to start with. He ran all the maintenance systems for a hospital. And then when we went over there, he changed jobs and he became the chief mechanical engineer for the King Saud University project, which 1980 is when he started that, and it was $6 billion, which was a ton of money in
Still a ton of
1980.
money.
Yeah, but I mean, in 1980, it was like, what could you build with that? And basically, in Saudi Arabia,
Anything you want.
yeah, you could build a city.
Yeah.
And that's what they did. The university right there outside of Riyadh is pretty much its own city now. So, yeah.
So you were living there.
Yeah. Living in the desert on a compound, joint French-American compound. And it was wonderful. I loved every bit of it. I mean, we were hellions. We really were in Saudi Arabia, where you probably shouldn't be a hellion as a middle school kid. But yeah, we were.
What else is there to do out in the middle of the desert?
Yeah, steal your parents' homemade wine and go drink in the desert. Yeah, we did a lot of that.
Sounds like fun.
Oh, it was a blast.
And Angela, you grew up a Navy brat.
Yes, still a Navy brat, technically. Once a Navy brat, always a Navy brat, I think. Yeah. My dad was retired from the Navy 26 years, 13 years active duty, 13 years reserves. And when I was born at Balboa Naval Hospital in San Diego. And that's where my parents were living at the time. And my mother's family is from Chattanooga, also actually a working dairy farm, actual cattle farm that my grandfather had in Saudi Daisy. And so my mother wanted to move back and be close to her family once they started having kids. So moved back here when I was 3 and grew up in Hickson, went to Hickson High School, Hickson Elementary, junior high school, all the way through. And then when I graduated from high school, I was one of the first dual enrollment students that Hamilton County schools had.
Oh, yeah.
So when I graduated from high school, I was already a junior in college. And there weren't a lot of universities at the time that would accept a 17-year-old who was already a junior. So they couldn't figure out, is she an upper class student? Is she still a freshman? So ended up just going to UTC and graduated when I was 19. And so my dad, that's kind of, Michael was in Saudi Arabia and they traveled all around when they took breaks, during the year. My dad literally joined the Navy because of the campaign, Join the Navy, See the World. So I hadn't necessarily done a whole lot of travel, but I grew up knowing it was important and that it was something that if you worked hard enough, you could find the right opportunity to facilitate it for you.
Yeah. So in terms of your dad being in the Navy, by the time you got to Chattanooga at 3, you were pretty much sure you weren't having to move around.
Right. Yeah, he switched to the reserves at that point. There's still a Navy reserve base here in Chattanooga. And so he was able to continue his career there in a different capacity and also satisfy my mom's desire to be close to her family when they started their own family.
So, Michael, back to Saudi Arabia, you're there through high school?
To the beginning of high school, actually, through 9th grade, because after that, I would have to go to a boarding school, and I begged my parents to send me to boarding school in Cyprus, who wouldn't want to do that, but they didn't. We came back to Winchester, and I came, left a very small town, went to Saudi Arabia and around the world, like 4 continents at that point, and then right back to a small town, my same high school.
And what's that transition like back into?
When I left, I was not as smart as Angela, but I was smart and a teacher's pet and bullied mercilessly in that small town. I was kind of small and I wore glasses back then. So then I went to Saudi Arabia and changed my life. Actually kind of came back to this small town a little bit of a celebrity. They threw a huge party for me. Nobody had ever thrown me a party. And when my brother and I came back, they threw this massive party. And it went really well after that. I wound up being senior class president.
Wow.
Popularity. Go to Saudi Arabia, everybody, and then come back and you'll be popular.
Changed your life.
It did. It totally changed my life.
How many years were you there?
4 years, yeah.
So 4 years later, you come back and you're kind of the conquering hero.
Absolutely. I was, yeah. And learned how to play soccer in Saudi Arabia. So I was, the captain of the soccer team. And I transformed. The caterpillar became a butterfly in the deserts of Saudi Arabia. Yeah.
Well put. And Angela, you obviously started UTC at 17.
I actually started classes the week before my 18th birthday and went every semester, including summers. My dad actually was going back for another degree and took some classes with me, some summer school classes. So we had a cool opportunity there. And yeah, I graduated when I was 19 and went straight into grad school, had no idea what I was doing. And, you think going straight through that trajectory would help you, but I actually felt like I needed some professional experience before I went to grad school at that point because, at that point I had no reference. I had no comparison for real life scenarios to apply that sort of advanced learning. But I mean, it worked out fine. Ended up with a master's degree and pursued a doctorate as well.
Was it intimidating to be that young going to college with older students, or
I've always kind of been 97 years old at heart.
Yeah.
So that aspect of it wasn't, it was interesting because a lot of my friends from high school and classmates who were my age were joining sororities and fraternities and doing things like that. And that wasn't something that worked with the path that I was on. So instead, I actually was writing for the UTC Echo. Mark Kennedy, if you know him from the Times Free Press, he is still an adjunct professor there, but he was my first journalism professor there and encouraged me to write for the student paper and probably set me down a path that I would not have otherwise considered because I wasn't doing the regular social stuff. So it worked out great for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And Michael, I want to get back to your first job because I don't think it really relates to what you're doing now.
Yeah.
Probably more than you think.
Moving a pile of dirt?
Yeah, I got 100 reals for that. So that's about $33. And it took me...
Probably not bad for that time.
Yeah, but it took like 3 weeks of every day after school. It was a huge pile of dirt. And I would go and shovel it, put it in a wheelbarrow and take it off to this ditch.
Was this the compound you lived in?
Yeah, the compound I lived with. And
so was it an American or a French person? Or?
It was an American. And the reason it had to be moved by hand, and they had excavators, they could have run that in there. But the guy... when he moved there was a fence already built around his backyard, and there was this huge pile of dirt. He couldn't use his backyard, and they didn't want to tear the fence down and then get an excavator in there and all that stuff. So, yeah, I don't know. Maybe my dad just wanted me to sweat for a while. But anyway, I found out, go move this pile of dirt. And, I mean, the job, a little bit funny, but the most interesting thing was that the guy was an engineer who was one of the original members of the Commodores. So... maybe you should have stuck it out in singing. I think he would have done better. But anyway, he was super nice. And I moved a pile of dirt for a Commodore.
Like I said, I think it's far more relevant to what you are doing now than you may realize.
So what was your first jobs for both of you coming out of school?
I went right straight through undergraduate to graduate school and then came right out and started teaching.
And what was your undergrad and graduate degree?
Communications. So we have that in common. Yep. We've got degrees in public relations, although I never use mine and she uses hers all the time. But then double mastered in political theory and education at the same time. So graduated with both of those master's degrees at the same time. And then right after that went straight to work at CSAS. I was a history and government teacher at CSAS was my first job.
And how about you, Angela?
I started working part-time at Light Mix 105, which is now Rock 105, still a Chattanooga radio station.
And if our podcast listeners can't discern, you've got a radio voice.
I did not then. I was listening the other day to my first air check, the one that I applied for that job. And this was in the time when they would run a classified ad in the newspaper, and I went to this tiny little independent recording studio on Brainerd Road, read a couple of fake commercials, did a couple of fake breaks and put them on a cassette, mailed it in, got that job in working weekends. I loved it so much. I thought it was so much fun. I'd never worked at a radio station, didn't do that in college, and told my boss at the time that I was so happy there that I would never leave unless US 101 called and offered me a job, because that was, pinnacle of radio in Chattanooga, pie in the sky. That will never happen, so I can throw it out there. And lo and behold, a couple of months later, I actually got a phone call where they said, hey, we need a new production director and somebody to do weekends. Are you interested? And I still remember going and telling my program director at the time, and he saw it on my face.
Yeah.
He said, they called you, didn't they? And so I was there for a couple of months, and the midday person left. And so I joined the CMA award-winning broadcast team at US 101 and had an absolute blast. Had the time of my life doing that.
Yeah, it gets in your blood, doesn't it?
It sure does. And it was such a fun bunch of people. And it was, I think, probably the first time I realized that it was possible for grown-ups to have fun at work if they were in the right career with the right coworkers in the right environment. And, after that, it was really tough to not have that much fun at work all the time,
Yeah. And you're currently on air at Sunny?
Yes, Sunny 92.3. I'm part of the weekend team there and also a graphic designer for that whole group of radio stations.
And Michael, you're currently with Hamilton County Schools, correct?
I'm at central office in the IT department, but I'm retiring in 2 weeks.
Wow.
So, yeah.
So by the time this podcast comes out, you will have been retired.
He will have blown the popsicle stand.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, that's tremendous, which is a great segue into what you really love doing. And I want to talk a little bit about how your careers and your jobs enable to do what you love doing. So if I'm not mistaken, your love of travel goes back to when y'all first met and decided to get married. You said what to Michael?
I told him that I would agree to marry him as long as he took me someplace exotic for our 5th wedding anniversary.
Always great when a proposal comes with a caveat, right?
It's more of an ultimatum, let's be honest.
Did you define exotic for him? I mean, it wasn't just a tiki bar.
No, she did.
I did. I had a coffee table book of gorgeous photography from Morocco. And that was absolutely the most exotic place that I could imagine on the planet. And so that was where I requested that we go. And we, happily married for 4.5 years and hadn't made any plans for this trip yet. And so I just went out and bought tickets. And
wow.
So we actually took that trip. We went to Spain and Gibraltar and then crossed the Strait of Gibraltar to Morocco. It was my first trip ever outside of North America and the Caribbean. And I was terrified. I had an absolute meltdown about a week before we left. And I remember sitting on the floor while I was packing and just being so afraid of all the unknown. And he talked me through it, and we had the most marvelous time. And after that, just haven't stopped, haven't looked back.
Well, we'll talk a little bit about that because you hadn't traveled as much. You'd been to Saudi Arabia, and I would imagine you probably traveled a bit when you were living in Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, Thailand, Kenya, Europe, quite a bit. Yes. So
Sudan?
Yeah. I went to Sudan. Yeah.
He'd been to 30-something countries, mostly as part of the time in Saudi Arabia, going back and forth because it made sense to use trips to and from as stopovers.
By the time I was in high school, I'd been to 30 countries and circumnavigated the globe.
Well, no wonder they gave you a hero's welcome when you came back. You were like,
here's Magellan.
I was just getting ready to say Magellan.
But I made it. I didn't get killed in the Philippines like he did. So, yeah.
Thank goodness. This would have been a very different story.
well, and that proves you're a good student because I knew he got killed, but I didn't know it was the Philippines.
Yeah, we've been to that monument. It's by a guy named Lapu Lapu who killed him. Yeah.
The name's so nice. They said it was. So that obviously established your love of travel. And when you met, I'm sure he's regaling you with all the travel stories, and you're like, buddy?
Absolutely. I mean, he made it sound so fascinating, so interesting. And he's such a wonderful storyteller. And he had all of these marvelous stories, just random encounters all over the world. And I wanted to be part of those stories and wanted to have stories of my own.
Yeah. So the 5th anniversary kind of lit the candle.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah.
You go on that trip. What was the big takeaway from that trip, if you remember?
Well, I like to always say that the best travel is the unscripted travel. We had a plan. We knew what we wanted to do, the kind of the path that we were going to go on. But the unscripted thing was honestly the overnight train from Tangier to Marrakesh. And so I knew we were going to take that train, but I thought maybe we could just book out a cabin. So, it would just be the two of us in a room because it was a sleeper train. Well, we couldn't. It was full. And so there were 2 other people in the cabin with us on our way down there.
Sleeping,
yes. They slept on their side and we slept on our side. But the best part of this, they were from Libya. They were Libyan policemen. Okay. And they were there on vacation and traveling together. And both of them were named Muhammad. So they didn't speak any English. We didn't really have Google Translate or anything. So we showed each
You
other.
had just enough Arabic to get the conversation going.
Yeah. And they understood Saudi Arabia. And so we kind of bonded on that. But then we showed each other pictures of our families on our phones and where we were from and everything. And with no real words exchanged, we exchanged jokes and laughed. And I've got one of my favorite travel pictures is me sitting on the bunk with either of these guys on my sides. And Angela took the picture, and we call it Mike and the Mohammeds.
And sounds like
That'd
a
be
band.
a great band name.
And that was the unscripted travel. And Angela realized and just had this wonderful time with these guys that we had just met, just a random encounter. And she knew at that point, oh my gosh, this is how it's done.
Yeah.
These are the memories that happen. It's not you go on a tour to the Eiffel Tower.
Right.
It's this.
It's not the things you sign up for.
Right.
What year was this?
2013.
2013.
And I'm just trying to get some context from the standpoint of internationally in U.S. relations. We weren't best friends with Libya at that.
No, Gaddafi's still alive.
Gaddafi was alive, and you're sharing a sleeper with two Libyan policemen. I'm sure that had to, at first, kind of, for both of you, both them and you, say, whoa, wait a second here.
You know what? As soon as we got in that sleeper cabin, the very first thing they did, they shook our hands and they offered us food.
Yeah.
And so I thought that's how all train rides went in Africa. So when we're leaving Marrakesh and going back to Tangier, I got all this extra food because I thought, well, I've got to be prepared for whomever is in our cabin on the way back. And it turned out to be a completely different experience. A very, very good friend of ours now and his young son, and I offered food, and he just said, no, thank you. He thought I was very strange for trying to force this food on him. They were delightful from the get-go. There was no hesitation.
Yeah. And, you're asking about, the relations between us and these Libyans and one truth of the world, if I can drop that, is countries have problems with each other, but people don't. They don't. People are the same. And
we've experienced this on all 7 continents. You know, you show up in a country and you're worried how they're going to respond when you're American based on those international relations. And people are either nice or they're not, and it doesn't really matter where they're from. And almost without fail, people are nice and generous and helpful. And we've been to some countries where, as Americans, we probably shouldn't be warmly welcomed. For example, when we were in Iraq, we never paid for a single meal there. They would find out that we were tourists, that we were visiting, and they wanted to extend their traditional hospitality. And so we would go to pay for our meal, and they would say, no, you're our guests. Welcome. And that's happened in a lot of places where, as an American, I might have been concerned about our reception if they found out where we're from. No, it's almost quite the opposite. They want to show us that they trust us, that they're welcoming to us, and vice versa.
Well, and that's such a good point in terms of the government being different than the people, because people around the world are all the same. They just want what's best for their family.
Yeah.
Yes.
And in a better situation, and we all have that in common.
Yeah.
Are you Anthony Bourdain fans?
Yes.
Yeah, I admire him. I do. I think he was a little too abrasive on some things. I don't know. I think I like to laugh more than he did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I like to connect with people over food. So that was something that I
and then
always...
that's kind of where I'm going with that. That common table thing.
Yeah. And Angela can tell some food stories for sure. She is a very adventurous eater, more so than me. I can eat chicken feet and stuff like that wherever I'm at, but she'll eat brains.
There's only one thing on the planet I've not been able to eat.
Yeah.
In the Philippines, there is a delicacy known as balut. And it is a fertilized egg, typically a duck egg, can also be a chicken egg, that's then fermented. eaten with hot sauce, and then the entire embryo is eaten as well. It looks, smells, and seems about as delightful as that description sounds. It is an aphrodisiac there, though. You will see young couples out on first dates, and they are sharing this treat together. And it's something, it's a hangover cure. It's a, one size fits all sort of delicacy there. That is the one thing on the planet we've encountered so far that I have not been able to eat. There are things I don't like, but I'll try everything but that.
It's called balut?
Balut. Mm-hmm.
Remind me of that when the new balut restaurant opens up downtown.
Balut 20 ways.
Don't think it'll go over in Chattanooga.
And the other thing you said I found interesting was first dates sharing balut. It's an aphrodisiac.
Well, aren't all aphrodisiacs kind of gross foods? I mean, oysters. Let's.
Oysters aren't gross.
A little bit. The first person who ate a raw oyster
was hungry.
That was a strong-willed person.
Yeah. So Morocco, Spain, Gibraltar launches its 5th anniversary. You don't go back and you say, well, that was great. For our 10th anniversary, we'll do this.
Oh, yeah.
You go.
We actually did have a 10th.
Well, you didn't wait till your 10th. You get back, do you say, how can we do this all the time? What do we need to do? And what I want to get at is, how does your career allow you the opportunity to do this? And what does it take from you on that standpoint, not just planning-wise, but understanding that my real focus is I want to travel. So these are the things I need to do that, yes, I enjoy my career, but yeah, I'd rather travel. How do you maintain that discipline to get that reward at the end?
That's a great question. And we get people asking us all the time, how do you afford to do this? I have, at any given point, I have 3 to 5 jobs. And I like very flexible work. And I work while we travel. So even though Michael is retiring, I am not. I'll still be working as we continue to travel. But when we decided that travel was a priority for us, we focused on it laser sharp. There's an investment counselor based out of Atlanta. She's got a really popular website. And her phrase is always that you can't afford everything, but you can afford anything. So in other words, you pick one thing that you're really focused on. And, maybe it is some sports car. Maybe it's a vacation home. Maybe it's a fishing boat, whatever your passion is. And if you focus on it hard enough, and if you're willing to work multiple jobs and make a lot of sacrifices for unnecessary things, it may take you a long time. But particularly, as first world citizens, it's if you have a goal, you can achieve it. And so when a lot of people ask us how we're able to do this, and they say they want to do it, we also hear them saying, well, I'm not. I like the idea, but I'm not willing to make the sacrifices.
Yeah. And part of those sacrifices, I guess, is job security, for a lack of a better way to put it, to say that this is my priority over here.
Yeah. Well, since I work for the school system, I do get vacation days. Yeah. Those vacation days roll over. So as anybody who works with me who hears this knows, I will build those up and then I will burn them all. And that's how we travel with these big, long, extended trips. I'll come back with basically no hours in the bank and then hunker down and build them back up and go again. And in particular, I want to go back to the, what was our plan after this 10-year or 5-year anniversary, and what are we going to do for our 10th? And you are exactly right. I mean, once you're bitten by the bug, like that's kind of all you think about. And so we joked about that after we got back. How are we going to top this? What are we going to do? And Angela wanted to go to Japan, and we were throwing out all these destinations, and it was a very long, months-long conversation back and forth between the two of us. And so I was trying to figure out how are we going to touch all these, or what are the most important. And I remember walking into her study and saying, you know what? The only way we can top this for our 10th, we're going to circumnavigate. We're going to go all the way around, and that's how we're going to get to all these places that we really want to go to. And then by that point, I realized it was going to take a lot longer than the vacation days I had built up. So we saved. We started saving for 5 years. We put everything back. I mean, we only have one car. Like we really.
That's a great discipline.
Oh, he cuts my hair. We don't go to coffee shops. I mean, no manicures, no, any of the things that could be sacrificed that we could do for ourselves or that we could do without, we did.
Yeah. And, when you go out to dinner and you're like, you spend $100 or whatever, I'm thinking, that's a plane ticket.
That's a one-way ticket between countries.
That is a plane ticket right there. That is a country. And so when $100 becomes your equivalent of a new country,
Great way to look at it.
yeah, you change your perspective on it, and you don't go out for that dinner. And so, saved for 5 years, built that plan up, and then I didn't have enough time, and so I said, well, I'm going to take a sabbatical. And so we had enough money in the bank that we could live without a salary, or without my salary, for a year. And the great thing with the school system, you can do that. A lot of people don't know that. It's right there in the MOU. Every 7 years, you can take a sabbatical.
Really?
Yeah. Now, it's a little more difficult if you are a classroom teacher, but I was not. And so we were able to do that.
But there's no way he would have made it 5 years either. So
Right.
there had to be trips in between.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. There
yeah.
had to be some. What'd you do in between your big trips?
Well, we wanted to involve our boys. We have 2 grown children. We actually have grandchildren. But at the time, we really wanted to show them the world and kind of share this new passion for me and this lifelong passion for Michael. And so we took them to some places. So we stopped giving them gifts for holidays, for birthdays, things like that, and instead gave them experiences. Mm-hmm. And the first trip we took with them, the first big international trip, we flew to Turkey and went to Turkey and Greece, rented a yacht, which sounds far more glamorous than it was. It was absolutely camping on the water. And we had a captain of the ship, and he taught the boys how to sail, and we went around to all these little Greek islands.
I bet they loved it.
Oh, my goodness. They lived their best lives. And so then we went to India. We've been to Iceland, all these places that we thought, okay, let's give them a taste of this and not force it on them, but give them some experiences that will hopefully create some passion for them, open some opportunities, and kind of set them on a path where they know that it is a very big yet a very small world.
Do you do any domestic travel?
Yes.
We've seen all 50 states. We love the national parks.
Yeah, this is a great country to be in. If you're a traveler and you don't want to travel internationally, you live in the best spot right here, because the United States is so varied, and I mean, just not just geographically, but culturally and with cuisine. I mean, you've got everything you could ever want in the United States. The joke is Americans don't travel because they don't have to. But I mean, we would always encourage people to go to another country. You definitely need that perspective. But yeah, the U.S. is fabulous.
At least see what you have here.
Yeah.
If nothing else.
Yeah.
So you did the 5-year anniversary, you did the 10-year anniversary, and you did some trips in between. Mm-hmm. What would one of those in-between trips look like? Because they're not to circumnavigate the world. Is it fly over to some small country for a week and stay, or?
Yeah, a week, 10 days. A week's really hard, by the time you get there and get over jet lag, and, then you're
3-4 days.
Right. And then you're dreading the day you got to leave. So 10 days is about the minimum. Yeah. And, if I could use Christmas or New Year's and kind of have those vacation days built in, I could burn maybe 3 days in between, and we would have enough time. So yeah, we, that would be the trip. 10
We're
days.
scuba divers too, so we have a group of friends that we typically meet somewhere around the world. And initially, it was almost always in the Caribbean for a dive trip, and so a week is about right for a dive trip that's in the same time zone or within an hour or two. The boys dive as well, so we did a lot of domestic trips with them. We love car camping. We're a small people, so we fit in the back of our car. We don't need a ton of leg room, so car camping is easy for us. The boys love to camp and hike, so when we couldn't get that far away, we still got away.
But I do want to tell this story. So we didn't have India on our radar at all, and this was after Greece and Turkey. And Angela was kind of playing a game in the car. I thought she was. She said, "Okay, Seychelles, South Africa, or India," and I was like, "What?" And she said, Which one do you want to go to? And so I said, well, Seychelles. I would love to go to the Seychelles. I thought she was just asking random questions. And
I said, oh, well, the dates don't fit with the boys' fall break.
Yeah. And so she said, what, between South Africa or India? I said, well, South Africa. I've never been that far down south. I would love to do that. She says, oh, well, okay. Would you be okay with India? And I said, yeah, what are you doing? She had found airfares, and those were the airfares, and they were selling out as she was asking me these questions. And
Are you familiar with airfares?
No, I was just getting ready to ask you, what are airfares?
So go ahead.
Anytime an airline enters a price for an airline ticket on their website, if you catch that mistake before someone fixes it, then you can purchase that ticket for, in most cases, a ridiculously good deal. Now, occasionally they'll withdraw the fare, so you're kind of taking a gamble there. You get your money back if they do that. But I'd found this massive sale, and it was Etihad Airways, which is one of the loveliest airlines on the planet. Best service, best food, all of this. And so they were actually running a sale, but it kind of came across as an airfare. And so I got us tickets from New York to Mumbai, round trip for $376 a piece.
And it happened to be on the boys' fall break.
Yeah.
And so she booked it before I was like, yeah, India would be great. And she goes, okay, we're going to India.
And then we show up at the airport in New York, and our son, who was in the Army at the time, was still in Army ROTC in high school. And so, when you fill out your information on the airline form, you can pick your courtesy title. And so I said, okay, well, Ben is obviously Master Ballard. He was like, in sixth grade or something at the time.
Yeah, it's just...
And so Zach was in high school, and I was like, what do you want your title to be? Master, Mister, what do you want? And he said, well, I'm a captain, so just put captain. So Captain Ballard. So we show up at the desk, and the agent calls us over to the side and says, thank you for your service, Captain Ballard. And he says, no, I'm just in high school. And they said, that's okay. It's still, part of, the Army. And they said, we would normally upgrade you to a first class lounge pass, but since you aren't 21, we can't do that. So instead, we're just going to move your parents to first class.
Oh, there you go.
So for $376 a piece round trip, we got to fly first class on Etihad. Now, it was coach on the way back. And let me tell you, that is a long way to fall after you have flown that far in first class to come back, in the middle seat crammed in by the galley in the back. You're helping them serve drinks. The ticket's so cheap.
I was going to ask you that. You do so much travel, and it's long haul travel.
A lot of it.
And is it all coach? Is it just if you get upgraded?
Yeah, and we travel enough now that we do get automatic upgrades, and we won't go into how to leverage credit cards here because we do that. That's a whole other podcast. But we do that very well. And one or the other of us, it always has an upgrade status. And if they upgrade one of us and we book the tickets together, they'll typically upgrade the other. And it works out really well. We
not always, though. No. Sometimes we really are in the last row by the bathroom. And I was not joking about helping them serve drinks. Yeah. Like, I would do that if it meant I could fly more.
So what's the secret to comfortably traveling coach when you're in an airplane for 7 or 8 hours?
Well, first of all, try not to take a 7 or 8 hour flight. I mean, sometimes you can't avoid it. We're an
11-hour flight.
Yeah, upcoming to Fiji, but there's just nothing else close unless you want to hop down through Samoa or something. But so anytime we cross the Atlantic, almost every single time we cross the Atlantic, we'll stop in either Iceland, because that shortens the flight, and they've got an up to a 1 week layover if you book with Iceland Air. So the ticket that gets you to Europe, it will always stop in Keflavik. You can stay there for up to a week for no extra money. Same thing on Azores airline. You can stop in the Azores, which is Portuguese territory, middle of the Atlantic, and one of our favorite places on the planet. Mm-hmm. Yeah, fly from New York. So it's like 4.5, 5 hours to get to the Azores. You stay there for a day or two, get over your jet lag, and then it's an hour and a half to the continent, and you hit the continent fresh.
Was this trial and error, or did someone show you, teach you?
It was not shown to us, but the first time we did it, we were like, oh, we're doing this every time. Yeah. We're doing this. This is great. Yeah.
So you did 5th anniversary, 10th anniversary, any others?
Then it got really exotic.
Yeah?
Yeah.
For our 15th anniversary, he took me to Syria.
Yeah, we just did Syria.
Which was amazing. I loved it.
And I'm just going to give you the ignorant travel person here. You hear some of the countries that you're talking about, Syria, Turkey, and they're beautiful countries. But I would say most Americans would go, well, why the heck would you want to go to Syria?
Oh, for sure, especially based on what they've probably seen for television or print news coverage, where it's always terrible news and wars and angry things and nothing about beauty and history and food and culture and people.
So what are we missing there?
First, I want to say this, that I've got a phrase. I like to say, don't judge a country by its coverage. Like, the news is going to show you the worst parts of everything. And I'm a doubting Thomas. I really am. I don't trust what I hear from anybody else. I want to see it on my own. And so when the opportunity to go to Syria came up, I was like, absolutely, we're going to go do that. And it is my favorite country. It is hands down my favorite. I have 123. The people. It's the people. Like everybody there was just so wonderfully welcoming, wholesome. We went to a wedding. We went to get ice cream in a small town, and all of the village children came out and went to the ice cream shop with us. And then the guy that was with us, that was our guide, bought all the kids ice cream. Like it was,
Like a movie.
It really was, and it has been the rule of thumb that the countries that have suffered the most with war and civil war and terrorism and stuff are the countries that show how resilient they are, at least at the personal level.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have friends in Syria, and I do like to say I want a friend from every country, at least one. And now we've got a dozen from Syria.
Michael's also a history buff, so even before we went and experienced the wonderful people and culture, he was looking forward to going to Crac the Chevalier and seeing, all of these historic ruins. We went to...
That's a Crusader castle, by the way.
Yeah. We went to the Roman amphitheater of Bosra, which is one of the best preserved Roman ruins on the planet, and it is absolutely stunning. To have those things to look forward to, and history is not my jam, so he was excited about it, and I was excited for him to be excited. But then you get there, and from a travel perspective, you were talking about how you afford travel. You also have to look at places where your dollar goes really far. The exchange rate there is 15,000 to 1. So, for example, we're in Damascus, and we're staying in this beautiful old villa that's been converted to a little boutique hotel. Because we're traveling together and most of the people in our group are solo, they gave us what was basically the honeymoon suite. So we end up with this 3-room suite, including this giant spread of local food for breakfast. And just all of these things included. It was $16 a night. $16. The tax you will pay on a hotel room in the U.S. is more than $16.
Yeah.
So to be able to have those experiences, and also for it to not cost us much as travelers, but to contribute so much to the local economy in a meaningful way, when we can find that balance where it's good for us and good for locals, that's absolutely going to bump up a destination. But then you throw in, Roman ruins and Crusader ruins and some of the loveliest people on the planet, and you can't beat it.
And you guys book all this on your own?
With the exception of places like Syria. Like Syria, you can't do on your own.
Can you not?
You can't. You have to have a fixer. And we went with a group of some of the best traveled people in the world. In fact, arguably the best traveled person on the planet. It's a guy named Harry Mitsidis, who is our good friend who's visited us here in Chattanooga. He was on that trip with us.
He has visited every country on the planet at least twice, and many of them multiple times. And he founded this site called Nomad Mania, and it helps you plan trips. It shares all the things of interest, but it also serves as a community for people who are global travelers to bring people together who would enjoy something like this and want to experience it together. And they don't do a lot of trip planning, but as Michael said, if it's a place that somebody local has to facilitate it for you for government reasons, for safety reasons, for visas, whatever, then they do put together a couple of trips like that a year. And so that was a very special one for us.
But you guys have kind of gotten into travel planning, haven't you? With We Married Adventure?
Yeah, when it's not Syria, like Iraq, I planned all of Iraq, and that's very doable. This next big trip that we've got, where we're circumnavigating, yes, we are going to spend some time with some big travel groups, but those are conferences, and they're not going to book anything with.
But you're doing that as a business now, right?
Yep.
But we don't do trip planning. Yeah. What Michael does is travel coaching.
Okay.
Both of us.
Explain that.
So we're both educators, okay, and we will always be, once an educator, you're always an educator, and so a travel coach teaches you how to travel. Instead of, you going to a travel agent and saying, well, we want to spend a week in France. And then that agent books the flights and the hotels, and here's what you're going to do, and here's your itinerary. And then, you're going to be on a bus and you're going to get off with a herd and do that. That's fine if you are new to it. But what I want to teach you is how to do all that much cheaper on your own, so that, instead of just being herded onto a bus, you get off a plane and you find a local driver and you negotiate with that guy. And then, for $10, you're doing the thing that's costing everybody else $100. And it's great to have a driver. I've done this many times myself. Find a driver, you see if you've got a rapport with the guy, and you say, hey, could I hire you for $50 for the rest of the day, and you take me to all these places? And most of the time they're like, yeah, shut off their meter, and they're just with you for the rest of the day. Great way to travel. And I teach people that that's okay. You can do that. It's safe. It's fun.
And I would think that would be the biggest fear of most people who don't travel much. How many languages do you each know, and how much does that help you?
I am embarrassingly bad at some Arabic. So
I would say embarrassingly bad at some Arabic is light years ahead of me.
Well, just, as soon as I say I know some Arabic, then somebody invariably tests me and I fail. But I'm
not going to test you.
Okay, thank goodness. All right. Angela is actually pretty good at Spanish.
I'm increasing my fluency in Spanish, working on French. And he has also been working on Japanese. And you studied Russian when you were younger. So he has all of the really challenging, guttural languages with different visual alphabets. And I pick all of the easy ones that have a lot of crossovers.
But that's got to be pretty important in terms of not being accepted by the people you're dealing with in a country, but just making the effort.
Wherever we go, we learn to say hello and thank you and at least another word or two in whatever the local language is. Because you're right, the effort is what's appreciated. And beyond that, you can use Google Translate and other free apps on your phone. You can translate menus with the camera. You can have whole conversations back and forth through the app. But taking the time and making the effort to learn a few words is always appreciated, I think, wherever you are on the planet.
And especially stuff that is kind of a local joke. If you've got a phrase that resonates, makes people laugh, it'll break the ice. And Angela's favorite, my favorite, is Mafi Mushkila. That's in Arabic.
It is what it is.
It is what it is. Almost literally, shit happens. And so anytime anything goes bad or wrong or unscripted, you can throw out a mafi mushkila, and that shows that you're cool with it, and they'll laugh.
Any Arabic country, they'll go, oh, mafi mushkila.
Mafi mushkila.
I got to remember that one. We can go a long time on this, and I want to get in a couple more questions before we run out of time. What is your favorite place to go?
Oh, that's like asking us our favorite child.
Well, obviously it's Zach because he got you the upgrade.
It goes back.
It changes by the week as to which. No, we love them both. They're great. Go ahead, Ange.
Well, I probably have one favorite per continent. That's about as far as I can narrow it down.
You know how bougie that sounds?
Oh, totally.
Hey, I'm not the one who needs 400-year-old Viennese espresso over here. Which, by the way, Michael is also not a coffee drinker. Ordered that by accident when we were in the Canary Islands. Thought he was ordering a certain local brand of beer, and what they heard was espresso. And he had it at 11 o'clock at night, and it was a double, and he did not sleep the entire night. And he was like, this is magic. I can smell colors.
I understand what people are talking about now.
Mufi Muscula.
Close.
I really love Morocco, of course. I love Botswana. I think it is one of the most magical places on the planet. If I could afford to live in Japan, I absolutely would. I appreciate order and neatness. I'm also a master gardener, so I mean, you put all that together with Japanese food, and I'm absolutely in heaven. But we're thinking of moving to Argentina, so it's obviously very high on the list.
What's your favorites, Michael?
She took the good ones.
Yeah.
Kidding.
On purpose.
No, even though I love Syria and it is my favorite country, I could never live in Syria. Syria, that's a place that I could go and see often, but I could never live there. Yeah, and basically the Middle East, I mean, I grew up there, so it is a little bit like going home for me when I go to the deserts. But again, couldn't live there. It's too harsh of a life. So all that said, Botswana, I'll agree with her there, and the Azores. We've already mentioned that. Portugal, all of Portugal, the mainland Portugal and Madeira and the Azores, the islands.
Yeah, I hear Portugal's wonderful.
It is.
And talk about a great place for Americans to live as expats.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
We love the Balkans too.
Yeah. I love Mexico City. Mm-hmm. Love Mexico City.
It's underrated.
It's
Strongly underrated.
It's like New York. It's got boroughs and
much bigger too.
Yeah, and walkable and great food and affordable. Oh,
yeah, affordable is important.
yes.
One more question, then I got to get to the last question. How do people get in touch with you if they're looking for a travel coach?
Probably through We Married Adventure. That would be the best way.
WeMarriedAdventure.com. We've got some information there. And, as Michael was describing it earlier, it's very much a teach a traveler to fish kind of thing.
Yeah.
So if you want to learn how to do it, or if you want to learn how to do it better, then absolutely. We're also on Instagram as we.married.adventure and on Facebook. And on Facebook, we actually have a group that we host that is called How to Travel the World, where we share free trip planning advice. And the great thing about that is it's kind of its own little travel community. So if you're planning a trip somewhere, you can go in the group and say, hey, has anyone ever been to so-and-so? What part of town should I stay in? Where should I eat? And kind of crowdsource it. And we get a lot of fun conversations with people who love sharing their favorites there.
Well, it's opened up a whole world of new friends to you, too.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So before I get to my last question, I want to remind our listeners who makes all this possible. It's a big thank you to the Tennessee Valley Authority for sponsoring My Morning Cup. Follow TVA on social media to learn more about its multifaceted mission of service and visit TVA.com/do good here to explore exciting TVA career opportunities. All right, I'm going to ask both of you to answer the same question.
Okay.
What would you tell your 25-year-old self is important for a happy life?
Oh.
Wow, I stumped you.
I'm just afraid of what I have to say on air that's being recorded. I mean, smack him across the head a little bit.
Your 25-year-old self?
My 25-year-old self, don't do certain things. I always knew, like even when I was 25, I knew that I needed to travel. I knew that I needed to be gone. And I actually knew this about my father. So my dad was more relaxed, more jovial. He was a good guy. He was a great father. But when he was traveling, when he was out of the country, he was a different man. And I was too. And I knew that about myself. And instead of, knuckling down and kind of doing the corporate walk, the career walk that I did here, I probably should have just thrown myself into the wind at 25 and seen what happened.
Yeah.
I'm very glad about where I wound up. I've got the best travel partner in the world.
I'm glad you added that.
Yeah, coulda, woulda, shoulda. But so I have no regrets about that. 2 great kids, and I've got Ange. So there's no regrets, and I don't really like to live my life by regrets. But our younger son right now is circumnavigating. He is in China. He's overlanded from Afghanistan to China. And when he hears this, he's going to know that he's going to hear the envy in my voice because at that age, I should have done some of that.
But you know what? That's a good thing for him to hear.
Yeah.
The envy in your voice.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. He is traveling harder and better than we have.
But you instilled it in him.
Yes. And he worked a full-time job all the way through college to fund this for himself.
You taught him that too. Mm-hmm. How about you, Ange?
I think that when I was 25, I still felt like life was a very linear thing. And I thought that I was on a path and I could see where it was going and thought that's where I needed to be simply because I could see the path. And it never occurred to me at that age to take the blinders off and see what was to either side or even behind or above me in a different direction. And I probably missed some opportunities by being so focused, even though it allowed me to accomplish a tremendous amount professionally and academically by that age. So, I think taking a minute to stop and look around and consider other possibilities that might not even just be a side John. It might be a completely different direction, and that's okay.
Yeah, and that's what's important is to realize that the opportunities are going to be there.
Mm-hmm. And there isn't just one.
And everything's an adventure.
Everything is an adventure. Thank you for bringing that right back around to our name.
You like that?
Dude.
Everything's an adventure. Well, I'm so glad you guys took the time to do the podcast with us. It's fascinating, and we're all envious.
It's been our pleasure to talk with you. Thanks for having us.
It's been great.
Thanks for listening to My Morning Cup, a podcast by Consta Media Advisors. If you liked this episode, please share it with a friend. I release a new episode each week, so be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple, Google, or wherever you listen to podcasts.